Are you sure? Because judging by how they're not moving, those look more like those cardboard stand-in fans. Granted, those will likely remain the liveliest fans the MLB will ever get even after the lockdowns end. The cold opener featured an obvious allusion to the Tortoise and the Hare, with Doremi and Onpu playing the titular characters respectively. I still prefer the Bugs Bunny version. God, I'm old. And after being reminded of the Purple Witch's little stunt from the last episode, we cut over to the Mahojo, where sure enough, Majurika confirmed that brainwashing is indeed dangerous black magic with significant repercussions, specifically... I
just know something bad is going to happen!
Still, whatever the punishment, they knew they had to do the right thing and warn Onpu. Thus, they spent the next day trying to talk to her about it, with no success. Oh well, I guess that's a plot point that can be dealt with later. Was there anything else they needed to worry about? Of course, this also meant Pop could take her exam, and hey, she took my advice. Granted, I said iced coffee, and if I may say, instant coffee is disgusting and definitely not for beginners. Something that Mrs. Harikaze agreed with.
I
know, I just want to imitate that one episode of Dexter's Lab. Seriously, freshly ground is the only way to go. Naturally, she fell asleep, so the Ojamajo tried to wake her up, but I guess she was a master of Zenitsu's fighting style. Unable to defeat the Thunder Breather, the Ojamajo went ahead. They met with the Motas, who in preparation for the test, took the sleepy Ojamajo out of their beds, but they were with them right now, so did they, reach into the past and take them?
You changed the future! You've created a time paradox!
Actually, while that was what I thought at first, their Pokemon talk quickly revealed these were their fairy partners. Yeah, for this test, they were required to work together, which makes sense as they have played a significant part in their training, and more importantly, these little guys have done pretty much nothing for the past few episodes. With that, they made their way to the testing grounds, which for whatever reason was a stadium with a crowd. Seriously, is this how the governing parties of this world make their money, by betting on young apprentices? Well, anyway, for their test, the fairies were going to race both the tortoise and the hare, with the witches providing backup. There were also a few rules. Okay, then just teleport them to the finish line. Yes, I know there are going to be some obstacles they'll be required to overcome in this episode, but they didn't say that, so why not? Of course, just like the cold opener, Doremi fully believed in the old Aesops, but I guess y'all really shouldn't believe in every fairy tale. So basically a Ninja Turtle and Usagi Yojimbo. Again, I am old. The Ojamajo could at least use some shortcuts, like bypassing a climbing wall with a hole. However, they didn't consider the fact that Doremi and her buns couldn't go through. I guess they're not detachable like Hikari's. Fortunately, a little brute force and meme-worthy faces did the trick. With that, the next obstacle reunited them with the examiner from a previous outing, who had them race in a three-legged race, which acted as a good measure for the bonds between the fairies and Ojamajo, and unsurprisingly, Doremi and Dodo still needed a little work. In the middle of all of this, Onpu popped in, apparently to distract them, not that she seemed to care, and more importantly, it gave the Ojamajo an opportunity to warn about the black magic she was using that she was well aware of. Yeah, apparently she wasn't all that concerned because... yeah, girl, you might want to check the warranty on that thing, just saying. All of that, plus this line about Onpu just letting her fairy partner hang out and watch TV, really helped to push the tortoise and the hare theme that they had going throughout this episode, more so than the actual characters themselves. Onpu was clearly the hare who believed that her speed, or in this case, knack for magic, made her inherently better than her peers, and yet she still tried to take unnecessary shortcuts to her goals as she viewed everything else as mere formality. Meanwhile, even if stuff like Doremi and Dodo's partnership was a work in progress, they were at least working on it. In fact, you could say all of the Ojamajo were the tortoise in this allegory, with them actually putting the work in, and while she was fine for now, it was clear that Onpu was setting herself up to lose the race in the long term. Still, with that, she flew off, having somewhat accomplished her mission by wasting a little bit of the Ojamajo's time. Eventually, they reached their final obstacle, which at first seemed like both of their competitors were reenacting the old tale, but as it turned out, their final challenge took place in the dream world. Let me guess, they'll have to deal with a psychotic helicopter Maru Tapir and her army of Monokuma rejects. Actually, they just needed to catch some butterflies in their dreams, which might be a reference to Zhang Zhu's butterfly dream story. We've talked about it previously on this channel, so I won't go into that deep philosophy again, and it's not as though it really mattered, as the Ojamajo fell asleep one by one. Hazuki did have a difficult time falling asleep because of her friends, but there were always easier ways of catching some Z's.
On a night like this, involuntary sleep is the only answer!
In the dream world, everyone, including Raph and Yojimbo, were having a hard time catching the butterflies. I'm really tempted to play a certain tune from a British sketch comedy, but, yeah. Of course, they considered using magic, which I'm not sure if they would be able to use their wands in the dream world, not unless their names were Kirby. And it didn't even really matter, as the fairies showed off some new magic that they could perform, for the most part, and managed to sneak up and successfully catch some butterflies. With this, they managed to get ahead of their opponents just as soon as Doremi woke up. Wake up! Eventually, though, Raph and Yojimbo woke up, and thus it became a rather exciting race to the finish. And remembering that it just had to be their fairy partners who needed to cross the finish line, they pulled a bit of a Mario Kart maneuver and won with a photo finish. With that, the episode ended with the Ojamajo getting their promotions, the fairies getting some sweet words from their partners, and Pop still getting some Z's as she dreamt about passing her exam. This was a really fun episode just on the premise alone, but it also gave us some good character building for both Onpu and the fairies. Honestly, all of these characters were in need of some development, considering the former had kind of been forgotten about while the latter had just been introduced. And thankfully, they addressed both fairly equally, all the while telling their own version of the Tortoise and the Hare. And thankfully, they were able to address both fairly equally, all the while telling their own version of the Tortoise and the Hare. Considering that this episode was following a significant shakeup in the status quo, they did need to at least do a little follow-up. Though at the same time, considering that Onpu was clearly being built up as the mysterious Sixth Ranger, they also couldn't reveal too much just yet. Thus, I think they found a good medium here by revealing that she was aware of the fact that she was playing with fire with her magic, but didn't care. That alone spoke volumes about her personality, which was mostly being a conceited little brat who, in spite of having her own wealth of talent, would rather take the easy way out rather than fully cultivating the skills she already had. Meanwhile, the Ojamajo, in spite of their average and below average aptitude for magic, were still willing to try their hardest at everything alongside their fairies, who also got a good chance to show off their developing skills in this episode, thus basically making them the tortoises to Onpu's hare. Speaking of which, the actual main plot of this episode was just pure fun. I mean, the visual of the tortoise and the hare working together as competent athletes alone was hilarious enough. And interestingly, this episode was written by Akatsuki Yamatoya, who, while I think some of his episodes can be hit and miss, this felt like something right out of Gintama with the over-the-top protagonist dealing with some even weirder anthropomorphic antagonists. There were just a lot of great visual gags, and yet also some really clever obstacles for them to overcome. And surprisingly, even the visuals were pretty good considering this was a Mitsuru Aoyama episode. I mean, yeah, there were still some of his usual corner-cutting tendencies, like some obvious repeated frames, or just plain no animation at all, but some of the faces here were just great, and there were some well-laid-out gags that made up for that. So, overall, this was a strong follow-up to the introduction of Onpu, and even if you removed her from the story, this was still a fun little adventure with a very unique take on the classic Aesop. Though again, I still prefer Cecil and Bugs. They've always been hilarious together. Moving into my new place is going fairly smoothly, and I can't wait to start displaying some of my anime figures in a much bigger space. And of course, I'll set aside time to finish up the third part of my Gold Princess review now that I think I've set up my new recording location, so look forward to that hopefully next week. And until then though, farewell for now my friends, and if you'll excuse me, I'm gonna go down to the racetracks. Yes, I'd like to put a bet down on the orange turtle. Yes, he has always been my favorite.